A Kroll Opera House was an opera building in Berlin, Germany, located in the central Tiergarten district on the western edge of the Königsplatz square, facing the Reichstag building. It was built in 1844 as an entertainment venue for the restaurant owner Joseph Kroll. During its eventful history, it was redeveloped as an opera house in 1851 and was used by various owners and directors for opera, operetta and drama. It was later operated by the Prussian state opera and drama companies and served as the assembly hall of the German Reichstag parliament from 1933 until 1942, severely damaged by bombing and the Battle of Berlin in World War II. It was finally demolished in 1951. On the 19th of July 1940, the Opera House was used to host the 1940 Field Marshal Ceremony 1842–1848. Early years. The Kroll story began in the Silesian capital Breslau, where the entrepreneur Joseph Kroll had opened the Kroll Winter Garden in 1837. The Breslau authorities chose this reputable establishment to entertain the new Prussian King Frederick William IV when he visited the city in 1841. The king was impressed by the splendid, flower-decorated rooms and suggested that something similar should be initiated in Berlin to become the social hub for the nobility and the Prussian residents. After a consultation with his garden director, Peter Joseph Lenné, and other members of the government, the king presented an order from the cabinet dated the 19th of August 1842, which specified the building site on the west side of the parade ground in the Große Tiergarten Park, and laid out the conditions. Kroll was able to use the property without charge, but he would have to return the land and demolish any structures he had built if the project failed. The parade ground, which had stood since 1730, was outside of the city just to the northwest of the Brandenburg Gate. It had long degenerated into a sandy field, and the Berliners therefore derisively called it the Sahara. Every step on the sandy ground would kick up a cloud of dust on the square. When it rained, the soil would turn into a massive dirty mud. Yet Kroll took solace in the fact that the greenery of the Tiergarten Park lay just beyond the property. The plans for the new building came from the court architect Friedrich Ludwig Prussian, which was a good indicator of the significance that the project had for Frederick William IV. Co-working with Karl Ferdinand Langhans and Eduard Noblau, after a construction period of only 10 months, Kroll's enterprise opened on the 15th of February 1844. 40 waiters were to serve up to 5,000 guests in the 3 halls, 13 boxes for at least 13 people each, and 14 large rooms. 60 musicians provided entertainment. The tunnel was a special attraction and praised as a novelty for Berlin, a hall where one could smoke. A technical innovation was the newly implemented gas lighting, which consisted of 400 flames. During the first year, Kroll had satisfactory results. The main attractions were the large exhibitions, concerts and balls, which took place around lavishly constructed stage sets, attracting even the waltz king Johann Strauss Jr. and his orchestra, who guested at Kroll's in 1845. Yet, despite its uniqueness in Germany, as noted by the critics, the enterprise became increasingly difficult to sustain. On the 15th of April 1848, on his deathbed, Kroll regretted that his king had once had breakfast with him. 1848–1894, between success and bankruptcy, Joseph Kroll's successor was his eldest daughter, August. The National People's Garden was opened as soon as May 1848 as part of an expansion. Great attractions were offered first in the garden and later in the Great Hall, such as performances with wild animals by the tamers and an extensive trade fair in 1849. In 1850, August Kroll established a permanent summer theatre with open-air performances of operas and other events. Here, among others, August's protégé Albert Lautzing directed his operas Undine, Der Waffenschmieden und Zimmermann. The operation of the new theatre and opera company was suddenly disrupted on the 1st of February 1851, when the curtains were accidentally set on fire while lamps were being lit. But August Kroll didn't let that stop her. She encashed the fire insurance summon on the 24th of February 1852. The theatre already reopened in a completely new building. About a year later, August married her Kapellmeister, the Hungarian violinist, conductor and businessman Jacob Engel. They successfully expanded the Kroll Opera Pool and brought many new comic operas to the stage, but also enacted lengthy music dramas by Richard Wagner. But the couple could not prevent the business from closing its doors on the 1st of April 1855. Despite all efforts, the earnings were far beneath the costs of operation. One of the creditors, the entrepreneur Heinrich Bergman, took over the insolvent operation and brought in such luminaries as Jacques Offenbach for one of his first guest appearances in Berlin. In 1862, however, Kroll was again forced into auction, which enabled Jacob Engel to buy it back. Although the company was still weighed down by debt, Engel was beaming with optimism, and attempted to bring the Berliners back into his establishment in droves with a diverse program, albeit only with moderate success. The situation worsened in 1869, when the implementation of economic freedom in Prussia led to a boom of newly established amusement parks all over Berlin. Engel's attempts to sell failed because of the Prussian tax authority and the heavy mortgage that weighed down the business. In addition, the former parade ground had been refurbished and named Königsplatz by the 18th of December 1864. The gardens were redone, and later plans were made for a series of monuments to honor the Prussian victories from 1864 to 71. After the Franco-Prussian War, the Victory Column was solemnly unveiled in the middle of the square on the 2nd of September 1873, while at the same time a long discussion took place at the German Reichstag Diet about whether to tear down the Kroll establishment and build a new parliamentary building in its place. Only in 1876 did these proposals, which were so detrimental to any future investments, get tossed out, so that Jacob Engel was able to proceed with the modernization and improvement of his establishment. In 1885, the first time in Berlin, the old gas lighting was therefore replaced by the Edison system of electric lighting. 2 years later, Engel was also able to secure a contract extension for another 40 years, but he ran out of time to implement his plans. He died unexpectedly from a stroke on the 28th of June 1888. His son tried to continue his work, but the lack of interest from the Berlin public for the Kroll stage's artistic presentation forced him to sell in 1894, 1895 to 1931 State Opera. Shortly afterwards, the building was acquired by the Prussian Königliche Schauspieler Royal Theatre Company, and Kroll's establishment was rebuilt as the Neues Königliches Open Theatre, a second theatre beside the Staatsoper unter den Linden. Works by young composers like Igor Stravinsky and Gustav Mahler were performed here, but also popular concerts given by Enrico Caruso and operettas like Die Fledermaus. As the decent opera house unter den Linden did not match with Emperor Wilhelm's attitudes, plans for a new luxuriant opera hall at the site of the Kroll Opera were developed and demolition had already started in 1914, when the outbreak of World War I halted the construction works. After the war, the authorities of the Free State of Prussia were unable to finance the reconstruction, which was finally carried out by the Volksbühne Theatre Company according to the plans of a Volksoper designed by Oskar Kaufmann. Nevertheless, it appeared that the Volksbühne Company also had overextended itself, and the completion of the refurbishment had to be secured by public funds. On the 1st of January 1924, the building was reopened again as the Oper am Königsplatz, the second home of the Berlin State Opera, with Erich Kleiber conducting Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg. With a square, the house was renamed Staatsoper am Platz der Republik in 1926. To Berlin, as it remained known as the Kroll Opera. In 1927, the Kroll Opera was again detached from the Staatsoper unter den Linden as a separate opera company with Otto Klemperer as its resident conductor. Reopened on the 19th of November with Beethoven's Fidelio. During Klemperer's term, the house saw world premieres as Paul Hindemith's Neues vom Tage in 1929 and Arnold Schoenberg's Begleitmusik zu einer Lichtspielszene in 1930. He worked with renowned conductors like Alexander von Zemlinsky and directors like Gustav Gründgens, as well as Kaspar Nier, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Teo Otto, Oskar Schlemmer and Giorgio de Chirico as stage designers. The entire singing cast was placed in the hands of the singing pedagogue, Professor Friedrich Hüssler. In an interview on German radio, Hüssler talks about the special atmosphere which existed at the Opera House during this period. He mentions some of the singers who were engaged at the time. Jarmila Novotná, who later went to New York to the Metropolitan Opera, or Kathe Heidersbach. She became very famous as Evchen in Meistersinger in Bayreuth, or Maria Schultz-Stormberg and Moya Vorbach, two very distinct personalities. They went to the other house unter den Linden later, and a very impressive personality, Iso Garland, the Russian. He returned to Russia and has become a highly respected pedagogue. Quote, he describes the generosity which existed among the singers. Their comradeship was extraordinary. No intrigues would arise. I remember that before rehearsals for a performance of Die Verkaufte Braut, 3 brides were sitting in my room, Novotná, Heidersbach and Zisili Reich. I remember them discussing, absolutely unselfishly, who of them should sing. Heidersbach said Novotná was the original Czech. Novotná said that Heidersbach had the more suitable lyric voice, whereas she herself was a coloratura soprano, and Reich then put forward an argument the benefit of the whole group. Where could you find such a thing? Klemperer's performances and the modern mise-en-scene were ahead of the time and raised the opposition by conservative circles. In the highly charged political atmosphere during the late days of the Weimar Republic, public pressure made the general administrator of the Prussian state theatres, Heinz Teichen, realize that the administration could not afford the funding of 3 opera houses in Berlin. Despite Klemperer's protests, the Kroll Opera was finally closed on 3 July 1931, with the last performance of Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, 1933–1951, seat of the Reichstag and destruction. The building stood empty for nearly 2 years, until the Reichstag fire on 27 February 1933 severely damaged the Reichstag building vis-a-vis. After the German federal election on 5 March 1933, the Kroll Opera became the seat of the Reichstag. It was chosen both because of its convenient location and for its seating capacity. On 23 March 1933, the majority of the Reichstag delegates in the Kroll Opera House disempowered themselves, passing the Enabling Act that gave Adolf Hitler virtually unlimited authority. At this time the elected MPs of the Communist Party and several Social Democrats were already in hiding or arrested. After the election on 12 November 1933, the National Socialists occupied all seats. The main hall of the Kroll Opera was used for sittings of the Reichstag from 1933 to 1942. It was here on 30 January 1939 that Hitler warned, if international finance in and outside Europe should again succeed in plunging the nations into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. The grandiose plans of Welthauptstadt Germania, prepared by Albert Speer for Hitler, included the demolition of the Kroll Opera House and its replacement by a sumptuous Führer's Palace, which would have stood on the western side of a Großer Platz, with an area of around 350,000 square meters. The outbreak of war and Germany's eventual defeat prevented any of this from being implemented. The last session of the Reichstag was held in the Kroll Opera House on 26 April 1942, passing a decree proclaiming Hitler supreme judge of the German people, allowing him to override the judiciary and administration in all matters. In those last days the building once again was the site of several performances of the Berlin State Opera after the Haus unter den Linden had been damaged by air raids. However, the Kroll Opera itself was devastated by a RAF bomber command attack on the 22nd of November 1943. It was further damaged in the last days of World War II, when forces of the Red Army stormed the Reichstag ruin. However, already in the summer of 1945 a restaurant reopened in the gardens of Kroll's establishment, keeping up business even after the remains of the building were demolished in 1951. The Tiergarten finally closed in 1956, and 1 year later, the last premises were cleared. Today the site is nothing but a large lawn south of the Bundeskanzleramt, since 2007 marked by a memorial plaque.